So there's an article that just came out in the UCLA Medical Center on their web page about my son Franklin Henry. Franklin was born June 18th, 1996. And Franklin, ever since he was quite young, we knew something was not quite right, just a little bit off, not making milestones. Over the years, we've seen all kinds of doctors and professionals. We've got everything from pervasive developmental disorder to autism to Tourette's. Whatever specialist you went to, whatever they specialized in, that's what he ended up having. From there, where this story gets interesting is back in 2011, I and my wife have another son, Theodore, and he was in a homeschool co-op. And on Mondays, he was in that co-op, and Franklin could not go with him and sit still. So my employer was kind enough to let me take off Mondays to keep my son Franklin busy. And I had to figure out something to keep him busy and to give him social skills. And I remembered I used to collect Lincoln pennies as a child, so I thought, well, let's go to the bank and get a roll of pennies. And I found that Franklin quite enjoyed opening them up and going through and pulling out oddities. Well, during that time, I found on the internet there was a group of people called Real Cent, who were a bunch of people who were selling pennies for anywhere from 1.5 cents to 2 cents a piece. On the older pre-1982 pennies were made out of copper. And at the time, you could ship 100 pounds on a United States Post Office box for like $18, quite cheap, so you could actually make money on flipping pennies. So I started doing that. Well, during that period, Nightline decided to do a program on penny hoarding, and they were asking for people to volunteer to show how it works. So I volunteered, and a producer reporter from Nightline flew up from Los Angeles and followed I and Franklin around for the day. Turned out to be such a popular Nightline program. It's one of the few times they've showed a Nightline program twice. In 2022, we had a genetics test. There's an organization called Spark for Autism, and if you have the diagnosis of anything in autism spectrum disorder, they will do a free genetics test for your whole family using the most modern of technology. I should say that Franklin's had 5 other genetics tests over the years, and none of them revealed what this test did. And it came back that he had one of his copies of the NR4A2 genes was most likely pathogenic, non-functioning, a loss of function variant. The only caveat is the only way to prove it is to do an RNA study, which is quite expensive, and it's not something that a doctor would order for you, but it would only be done at a university level. Also, there was, at that point, back in 2022, there was only 20 people in medical literature who had been identified with this syndrome, so extremely rare. With 8.5 billion people in the world, hardly anyone who has it. In 2024, out of the blue, I got a message on Messenger from a New York Times reporter who wanted to do an updated story on penny hoarding. But I told her when at work, it's almost like that Seinfeld episode where they were going to take pop cans from one state to another state and make some money on flipping it. Because freight costs have went up, banks won't give out change without buying it. It doesn't work. So I tried to sell her on doing a story on my son's genetics because I thought that was more interesting and more rare than flipping pennies. But she didn't seem interesting, so life went on from there. In April 2024, I have always written research, was trying to learn out what's going on about my son. Well, I contacted a researcher at UCLA who almost 10 years ago proposed that the NR4A2 gene had something to do with speech and language acquisition. And I was just complimenting him about what a wonderful job he did finding this out before anybody else did. Well, through some correspondence, he offered to do the RNA test to find out if my son's gene was truly not producing anything. And he volunteered to do that, and we found out it's not producing anything. So then again, I reached out to the New York Times reporter, tried to sell doing a story on this, and again, didn't seem interested or never heard back. Just this year, in May of 2025, I'm part of a Facebook support group for families with NR4A2. And about every few months, there's a new member joins when some genetics test reveals that their child has NR4A2, what's now known as related syndrome. The new person that joined happened to be a pediatric neurologist, the same type of people that treat these kids with NR4A2 related syndrome. And I should add, most of these kids have sleep issues, and this pediatric neurologist also specializes in sleep disorders. And if you think about it, there's only 2,500 pediatric neurologists in the United States. There's probably 250 sleep pediatric neurologists in the United States, and this woman's child has NR4A2 related syndrome. So then I thought, I'm going to reach out to the New York Times again and try pitching a story on this, because I should have mentioned earlier, this gene is also thought to be responsible for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's to a certain degree. So these kids, by studying them, might help unlock what's going on with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and unlock what's going on with them. So I thought, well, I'll try emailing the New York Times reporter again. And I went to bed on it, didn't do it that night. And then I thought to myself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to Google the Nightline reporter, since they've already been to my house in the past, and try selling them on it. So I Googled the reporter from ABC at the time who did this story, found out she no longer works for ABC, but she's the chief science writer for UCLA, the very same place where they're already studying my son. So I contacted her, and she put this story up. What's the odds of it, with 8.5 billion people in the world, to have the chief science writer at UCLA, where they're studying my son, who was at my house doing a story on pennies almost 15 years ago, who already knew my son Franklin? The odds are just phenomenal that it should have never happened. And it's a wonderful story, and it's wonderful work that they're doing. And I would be very proud if I and my son helped unlock the mystery of his disorder, and maybe help with the disorders of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.